The story opens on Station Gamma 7, a peaceful trading outpost where humans and aliens have worked together for decades. Commander Daeho leads the small human security team, while Dr. So-young runs the medical bay that treats species from across the galaxy. The station buzzes with normal activity until the Vorthak Empire's warships arrive without warning. The Vorthak soldiers storm through the station like a black tide. Their leader, General Crix, announces that humans are now considered enemies of the Empire. They round up every human on the station, including families and children. In the main plaza, they force everyone to watch as Vorthak soldiers tear down Earth flags and burn them in a ceremonial fire. The aliens who worked alongside humans for years can only watch in horror as their friends are dragged away. Young Jinwoo, barely 18 and working his first job at the station, tries to record the burning on his communicator. A Vorthak soldier spots him and crushes both the device and his hand with a powered glove. The message is clear: humanity means nothing to the galaxy now. The Vorthak have decided humans are too weak, too soft, and too naive to deserve a place among the stars. As the flags burn, Commander Daeho catches the eye of his alien friend Tarek, a beetle-like creature who has worked security with him for years. The silent exchange between them carries weight. Tarek knows something the Vorthak don't. He knows that burning Earth's flags might be the biggest mistake the Empire ever made. The ashes float in the station's recycled air like gray snow, settling on everything and everyone as a reminder of this moment. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was louder than a storm on a metal planet. Representatives from 200 species filled the massive chamber that floated in space above the neutral world of Concordia. The dome-shaped room buzzed with panic as holographic displays showed Vorthak fleets moving toward peaceful systems. Everywhere Ambassador Hyjin sat quietly at the small human delegation table. Her simple black business suit looked plain next to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by other delegates. She was 45 years old, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her hands rested calmly on a leather notebook while chaos exploded around her. The arachnid representative clicked his 8 legs against the floor in distress. His spider-like body shook as he spoke through his translator. The Vorthak have given us an ultimatum. Any species that continues to trade with humans will be considered enemies of the Empire. We cannot risk war over one small species. The crystalline Nexari ambassador chimed like breaking glass as her thoughts became sound. We have worked with humans for decades, but we cannot sacrifice our entire civilization for them. The Vorthak control half the galaxy and their military power is beyond measure. One by one, the species of the galaxy stood to abandon humanity. The peaceful, gentle ones with their soft gray skin and large eyes spoke in whispers. We are sorry, but we cannot help the fish. Like aquarians made bubbling sounds that translated to regret, but also to goodbye. Even the proud Centauran Republic announced they would close all borders to human. Ship Shaijin listened to each betrayal with the same calm expression. She wrote notes in her simple paper notebook, using an old-fashioned pen instead of the holographic systems everyone else used to the other delegates. This made her seem backward and primitive. Exactly the kind of thinking that had gotten humans into this maze the Vorthak ambassador dominated. The center of the chamber, his massive frame, was covered in battle scars, while his red eyes swept across the room like searchlights. Ambassador Gorvak had conquered 12 worlds personally, and his presence made even the bravest delegates nervous. He spoke in a voice like grinding stone. Humans are a disease in the galactic community. They spread their weak ideas about cooperation and peace while hiding behind stronger species. They have no military power, no warrior tradition, and no right to exist among the stars. The Vorthak Empire will cleanse the galaxy of their poison. The session continued for 6 hours with species after species cutting ties with Earth. The few delegates who spoke in favor of humans were quickly silenced by threats and fear. By the end, only 3 minor species remained allied with humanity, and even they looked ready to change their minds. When the session finally ended, Hyjin approached the Vorthak ambassador with slow, careful steps. Her simple black shoes made no sound on the crystal floor, while Gorvik's massive boots left cracks with each step. She requested a private meeting in the neutral zone chambers, and surprisingly he agreed. The small meeting room was designed for two-person negotiations. It had gray walls, no windows, and a simple metal table with two chairs. Gorvek filled his chair completely while Hyjin looked like a child sitting across from him. His armor was covered in the skulls of enemies while she wore only a small earth pin on her jacket. Gorvak expected her to beg. He had seen dozens of species surrender when faced with Vorthak might. Some offered tribute, others promised military service, and a few simply asked for a quick death. Instead, Hyjin placed a single photograph on the metal table between them. The image showed the burning Earth flag from Station Gamma 7. Human prisoners stood in the background, including children and elderly people. The smoke from the burning flag rose like a dark cloud while Vorthak soldiers watched with satisfaction. It was a perfect record of the Empire pride and humanity. Shamahi Jin voice remained steady and polite as she spoke. Earth formally requests the immediate release of all human prisoners taken from Station Gamma 7. We also request an official apology for the destruction of our flag in violation of galactic law. We are prepared to discuss this matter. Diplomat Caligarv stared at her for a long moment, then began to laugh. The sound filled the small room like thunder, echoing off the walls. His massive chest shook while tears of amusement ran down his scarred cheeks. He laughed until his sides hurt and he had to wipe his eyes with a claw the size of a human. "Can you make demands of the Vorthak Empire?" he finally gasped. "A species that cannot defend one small trading station dares to negotiate with warriors who have conquered 1,000 worlds. Your people will be executed in 7 days and broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to anyone else who thinks they can resist." Ushjin nodded as if this was exactly the answer she had expected. She stood up, smoothed down her simple jacket, and thanked him politely for his time. As she walked toward the door, Gorvik called after her with cruel amusement, "Tell me, little human, what will your weak species do when we start killing your people? Will you cry? Will you beg the galaxy for help? Will you offer to be our slaves?" She paused at the door and turned back to face him. Her expression had not changed at all during the entire meeting. She looked like a librarian or a schoolteacher, not someone whose entire species was about to be destroyed. Her next words were spoken in the same calm tone she had used throughout. "We have procedures for this situation." Then she left the photograph on the table and walked out. Gorvak picked up the image and studied it more carefully. The burning flag, the terrified humans, the proud Vorthak soldiers. It was a perfect record of their victory, but something about the human woman's calm reaction made him uncomfortable. He had conquered dozens of species and seen every possible response to Vorthak threats. Some raged, others wept. Many tried to negotiate with offers of wealth or technology, but none had ever responded with such complete calm. It was as if she had been expecting this exact scenario and was simply following a plan back in her simple quarters. Hyjin sat at a small desk and opened her leather notebook. The pages were filled with handwritten notes in several languages, including some that looked very old. She turned to a section marked Emergency Protocols and ran her finger down a list of items. Each item had a small box next to it, and she began making check marks with her pen. Diplomatic contact attempted. Check. Formal demands presented. Check. 7-day timeline established. Check. She continued down the list, marking boxes with the careful precision of someone following instructions that had been written long ago. The final item on the list simply said, "Activate Phase 2. She made a check mark next to it, then closed the notebook and placed it in a small safe. The combination lock was old-fashioned with rotating numbers instead of the biometric scanners used by other species. As she prepared for sleep, Hyjin looked out the small window at the stars. Scattered across space, somewhere out there, human prisoners were waiting for rescue, while Vorthak fleets prepared for executions. The galaxy thought humanity was helpless, and maybe that was exactly what Earth wanted them to think. In 7 days, the Vorthak Empire would learn that some species become most dangerous when they appear most weak. The quiet woman who had sat calmly through 6 hours of betrayal was not a frightened diplomat. She was a professional doing a job she had trained for her entire life. And her job was about to get very interesting. The photograph of the burning flag remained on the table in the empty meeting room, a reminder of the moment when the Vorthak Empire made the biggest mistake in its long and violent history. Earth looked peaceful from orbit as the morning sun painted the blue marble surface with gold. The city sparkled like scattered jewels. While white clouds drifted across the continents below the atmosphere, 20 billion humans went about their normal daily routines as if nothing important had happened. News of the Vorthak ultimatum spread quickly through the global networks. People gathered in city squares and parks to watch the broadcasts on public screens. Some cried, others looked angry. But most seemed confused. The government had made no dramatic announcements, no calls for military preparation, no requests for panic buying or emergency shelters in Seoul. The morning commute continued as usual. Subway trains carried millions of workers to their jobs while street vendors sold breakfast to hurried pedestrians. The only sign of the galactic crisis was the slightly larger crowds around news displays and the worried conversations people had on their finesse. Mi Kyung walked through Gangnam Station carrying her usual briefcase and wearing her ordinary gray business suit. She was 32 years old and worked as an insurance adjuster for a major corporation. Her job involved visiting accident sites and calculating damage payments for everything from car crashes to factory fires. It was boring work that required attention to detail and endless paperwork. As she climbed the stairs to street level, her phone buzzed with what looked like a spam message about life insurance policies. The text seemed random and meaningless, but Mi Kyung read it carefully twice. Then she deleted the message and continued walking to her office building as if nothing had happened around the world. Thousands of other people received similar messages. A librarian in Snow Paulo got a notification about overdue books. A shop owner in Lagos received an update about inventory systems. A teacher in Mumbai was reminded about a parent conference that had been canceled months ago. All normal, boring messages that anyone might ignore, but these people did not ignore them. They memorized every word, then deleted the messages and went back to their regular activities. To anyone watching, they appeared completely normal. They went to work, had lunch with coworkers, and complained about traffic jams just like billions of other humans. That evening, Mi Kyung left her office at exactly 6:30 as she did every weekday. She took the subway home, stopped at a convenience store for milk and rice, then cooked dinner while watching a cooking show on television. She seemed like the most ordinary person on a planet full of ordinary people. At 11:45, she put on dark clothes and a baseball cap, then left her apartment through the service entrance. She walked 6 blocks through quiet streets, then entered an abandoned subway tunnel that had been sealed off during construction 20 years ago. The tunnel was supposed to be empty, but Mi Kyung knew exactly where to find the hidden door. The passage led down through levels that did not appear on any city blueprints. She descended stairs carved from solid rock, past chambers filled with equipment that hummed softly in the darkness. Other people moved through the tunnels with quiet efficiency, their faces lit by the glow of advanced display. Similar scenes played out under major cities across Earth. In London, old World War II bunkers came alive with activity, while in Tokyo, abandoned subway extensions housed networks that had never appeared on any government plans. Mountain facilities disguised as weather stations activated systems that had been dormant for decades. The hidden infrastructure was vast and sophisticated, but designed to look completely ordinary. From the surface, everything appeared normal. Power grids carried electricity to homes and businesses, while communication networks handled billions of phone calls and internet messages. Water treatment plants and transportation systems operated exactly as they always had, but buried within the normal operations were hidden channels and backdoors that now activated for the first time in decades. A traffic control system in Berlin started sending coded signals to similar systems in other cities. A power plant in Mexico began routing electricity through paths that existed only in secret blueprints. Young technician Byung-soo worked in one of the deepest facilities located far beneath the mountains of North Korea. His workplace was officially listed as a geological research station, but the equipment he operated had nothing to do with studying rocks. The control room was filled with displays showing systems scattered across the galaxy. His fingers moved across interfaces that looked nothing like known human technology. The screens showed status reports from distant worlds, trading stations, and even alien government facilities. Most of the indicators were green, but some were flashing yellow as they switched from standby mode to active operation. The facility where Byung-soo worked was one of hundreds scattered across Earth and human colonies. Each one monitored different aspects of the vast network that humanity had been building for generations. What looked like civilian infrastructure was actually the foundation of something much more sophisticated: communication satellites that carried entertainment broadcasts, also relayed coded instructions to receivers hidden throughout the galaxy. Water purification systems sold to alien worlds contained components that served additional purposes even their designers had not known about. Mining equipment, shipping computers, and medical devices all carried hidden elements. The network was so subtle and long-term that no species had noticed its construction. Human traders had sold technology throughout the galaxy for over a century, always appearing helpful and eager to please. They offered software updates, maintenance contracts, and technical support with genuine smiles and honest prices, but every piece of technology contained hidden elements that could be activated when needed. Emergency protocols that had been programmed decades earlier now received wake-up signals from Earth backup systems that had seemed like helpful redundancy began preparing to take control of primary operations. In the hidden facility beneath Sol Mikyung sat before a wall of displays showing the status of systems across Vorthok space. Each screen represented months or years of careful preparation. Human technicians had worked on Vorthok military bases, maintaining their computers and communication networks with professional competence. The Vorthok had never questioned human technical support teams. They were efficient, quiet, and reliable workers who kept complex systems running smoothly. They asked few questions, followed orders precisely, and seemed grateful for the opportunity to serve the mighty empire. No one suspected that every repair, every software update, and every replacement part was part of a plan. Similar preparations had been made throughout the galaxy. Wherever humans worked, they had quietly embedded hidden capabilities into the technology around them. It was not sabotage in any traditional sense, but rather a form of technological integration so deep that removing it would require rebuilding everything from scratch. The systems were designed to remain completely dormant until activated by specific signals from Earth. Once triggered, they would not destroy or damage anything, but simply redirect control to new operators, the species that had built their civilization on Vorthok technology would find their own equipment working for different masters. As dawn broke over Earth, the hidden network reached full activation status. Millions of ordinary humans had spent the night preparing for something the galaxy thought impossible. A species without significant military power was about to demonstrate that there were many different ways to fight a war. In her apartment, Mekyung changed back into her business clothes and prepared for another normal day at the office. She would process insurance claims, answer phone calls, and calculate damage payments just like always, but now she also carried the knowledge that humanity's greatest insurance policy was finally ready to pay out. The galaxy thought humans were naive and helpless, but they had never understood the true nature of human patience. Humanity had been preparing for this moment since their first contact with alien technology, taking the long view that only a species with relatively short individual lives could appreciate. In 72 hours, General Crix would begin executing human prisoners, but by then it would be far too late to stop what was already in motion. The Vorthok Empire had 6 days left to enjoy being the most powerful force in the galaxy. After that, they would learn what happened when you burn the wrong species flag. The Vorthok Empire stretched across 200 star systems like a metal spider web of conquest. Each world bristled with military installations while massive fleets patrolled the space lanes between them. For 3 centuries, the Empire had grown through pure military might, crushing any species that dared resist their expansion. General Crix stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Victory, watching the preparations for what would be the most important broadcast in galactic history. The execution of human prisoners would send a message to every species in known space that resistance to Vorthok power was futile and deadly. The ship was a monument to military engineering, 5 kilometers long, with armor plating that could withstand direct hits from planet-cracking weapons. Its bridge offered a perfect view through reinforced crystal windows, while holographic displays showed the positions of his entire fleet. 26 other warships surrounded the flagship in perfect formation below. In the detention bay, Commander Deho stood with the other prisoners from Station Gamma 7, they had been given simple gray uniforms and minimal food for the past 6 days, while Vorthok propaganda broadcasts played constantly through speakers in the walls. The messages all carried the same theme about human weakness and the superiority of warrior cultures. Dr. So Young knelt beside an elderly human trader whose heart condition had worsened during captivity. She had been allowed basic medical supplies, but nothing that could actually treat serious conditions. The Vorthok wanted their prisoners alive for the execution, but did not care if they suffered before that moment arrived. Young Jin Woo sat against the wall holding his damaged hand. Close to his chest, the bones had been set by So Young, but without proper medical equipment, the healing was slow and painful. He stared at the metal ceiling and wondered if anyone on Earth even knew what had happened to them. The execution was scheduled to take place on the observation deck, where massive windows would provide a perfect view of space for the cameras. Broadcasting equipment from dozens of news networks had been set up to carry the event live to every civilized world. Camera operators tested their equipment while reporters prepared scripts about the end of human expansion. But as the final hour approached, something strange began happening throughout Vorthok space. The first signs were small and easy to ignore. A navigation computer on a patrol ship started giving incorrect coordinates. A communication relay in the Proxima sector began broadcasting static instead of messages. The problem spread slowly like ripples in a pond. Military bases found their inventory systems ordering supplies to wrong locations, while transport ships received conflicting instructions about cargo destinations. Defense platforms protecting important worlds began reporting sensor malfunctions that made them see threats where none existed. On the bridge of the Eternal Victory, Crix watched as his communications officer struggled with equipment that had worked perfectly for years. The displays flickered between normal operations and error messages written in symbols that no one recognized. When technicians tried to fix the problems, they found that their diagnostic tools were also malfunctioning. Similar issues affected ships throughout the fleet. Navigation systems that had guided vessels across the galaxy for decades suddenly could not plot courses to nearby planets. Weapon targeting computers began tracking imaginary enemies, while life support systems fluctuated between normal and emergency settings. The problems were not random chaos, but seemed to follow a pattern that no Vorthok could understand. Systems failed at precisely the wrong moments, creating cascading failures that affected multiple ships simultaneously. Communication between vessels became impossible as relay stations throughout the Empire went offline. One by one, General Crix tried to contact other fleet commanders, but received only static or strange music that sounded like human children singing nursery rhymes. His own ship systems were becoming unreliable, with artificial gravity fluctuating and lights dimming randomly. The mighty warship that had never known defeat was acting like a damaged civilian vessel in the medical bay. Dr. So Young noticed something unusual about the emergency supplies she had been given for treating prisoners. The basic medical kit contained substances that should not have been there, trace elements that matched no known medicine but seemed familiar from her advanced chemistry training back on Earth. She began combining the substances in small quantities. Following half-remembered procedures from medical school, the reaction produced compounds that could be used for very different purposes than healing. If someone had planned for prisoners to have access to these specific materials, it meant that even this desperate situation had been anticipated throughout Vorthok space. The Empire's vast military machine began to break down in ways that seemed impossible. Computer networks that had operated flawlessly for generations suddenly developed critical errors that could not be repaired. Automated defense systems started attacking their own ships, while supply convoys found themselves lost in empty space. The technology failures followed no pattern that Vorthok engineers could understand. Every attempt to fix one problem created two more problems somewhere else. It was as if their entire technological infrastructure had developed a form of electronic cancer that spread faster than any treatment could stop it. Admiral Gorvak, commanding the home fleet protecting the Vorthok capital, received reports of chaos from across the Empire. His own ships were experiencing similar problems, but he had assumed they were isolated incidents. The scale of the technological breakdown was becoming clear and it terrified him more than any enemy fleet. Emergency meetings were called in the deepest bunkers of the Vorthic capital as military leaders tried to understand what was happening. Their greatest scientists examined failed systems and found components that should not exist. Hardware that had been installed by human maintenance teams over the years contained elements that served no apparent purpose. The truth began to emerge as Vorthic investigators traced the source of their problems. Every piece of technology purchased from human suppliers over the past several decades contained hidden modifications. Software updates provided by helpful human technicians carried dormant code that was now activating simultaneously across the galaxy. The humans had not attacked the Vorthic Empire in any conventional sense. Instead, they had slowly and quietly embedded themselves so deeply into Vorthic technology that separating the two systems would require rebuilding their entire civilization. From basic materials, the warrior species that had conquered through strength had been defeated by patience and planning. On distant worlds, Vorthic garrisons found themselves unable to operate their own equipment. Vehicles would not start, weapons would not fire, and communication systems broadcast random entertainment instead of military orders. The mighty empire that had seemed invincible was being reduced to using primitive methods that had not been seen in centuries. The species that other aliens had dismissed as naive traders had been playing a game so sophisticated and long-term that no one had noticed until it was too late. Every helpful gesture, every technical assistance contract, and every maintenance agreement had been part of a strategy that spanned generations. As the appointed execution time approached, General Crix realized that his fleet was no longer capable of broadcasting anything to anyone. His ships could barely maintain life support, let alone coordinate a galactic propaganda event. The execution chamber filled with confused technicians who could not operate their own equipment. The humans in the detention bay could hear Vorthic soldiers shouting in their own language while alarms sounded throughout the ship. Something was happening, but the prisoners had no way to know. What emergency lighting cast strange shadows while the constant hum of the ship engines changed to irregular patterns. Commander Deho looked through the small window in the detention bay door and saw Vorthic guards arguing among themselves while pointing at control panels that flickered with error messages. The mighty warriors who had seemed so confident now appeared confused and frightened by technology that no longer obeyed their commands. The empire that had ruled through fear and strength was learning that there were other forms of power that could not be conquered by military might alone. The quiet species they had dismissed as weak had just demonstrated that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones who appeared most harmless. The Sahara Desert stretched endlessly under the blazing sun while tourists at nearby resorts enjoyed their vacations completely unaware of what lay beneath the sand dunes. 300 meters underground, engineer Tae Woo sat in a control room that officially did not exist, watching displays that showed the collapse of the Vorthic Empire in real time. Each screen represented a different star system where Vorthic technology was failing in carefully orchestrated patterns. Military bases lost power at precisely calculated moments, while supply ships found themselves stranded between stars with navigation systems that guided them nowhere. Transport networks ground to a halt as traffic control computers began routing cargo to empty space. The facility had been built over 20 years using equipment smuggled piece by piece through legitimate mining operations. The excavation had been disguised as research into underground water sources, while the sophisticated technology was installed under cover of geological surveys. No satellite or surface inspection had ever detected its true purpose. Wu fingers moved across control interfaces that had been designed by the most brilliant human engineers working in absolute secrecy. The systems were connected to hidden networks throughout the galaxy using communication protocols that piggybacked on civilian broadcasts and commercial data streams. Every entertainment program and news report carried embedded signals. Undoubtedly, these hidden receivers could detect. The screens showed status updates from across Vorthic space as human sleeper protocols activated simultaneously in thousands of locations. Maintenance systems that had been installed by helpful human technicians over the decades were revealing their true purpose. Power grids began rerouting electricity away from military installations, while water treatment plants added harmless but equipment-damaging minerals to the supply on the planet Zarian. Home to the Vorthak Military Academy, cadets found themselves trapped in dormitories as electronic locks refused to open. Training simulators displayed children cartoons instead of combat scenarios, while the mess hall served meals that had been ordered for a different planet entirely. The future officers of the Empire were reduced to breaking down doors with primitive tools similar. Chaos spread across the Vorthak homeworlds as civilian infrastructure began working against its own operators. Communication networks that had carried orders across the Empire for generations now broadcast meditation music and poetry readings. Traffic control systems guided hover cars into empty lots while banking computers began transferring funds to random accounts. The beautiful irony was not lost on Taewoo as he watched his displays. The Vorthak had conquered species across the galaxy by destroying their technology and infrastructure. Now their own technology was being turned against them by the very people they had dismissed as primitive merchants and naive engineers in hidden facilities beneath major cities around Earth. Similar control rooms monitored different aspects of the vast operation. London coordinated the failure of Vorthak shipping networks, while Tokyo managed the collapse of their military communication systems. Each facility had been staffed by humans who lived completely normal lives above ground, working as teachers, mechanics, and store clerks. The network had taken 3 generations to build, with each phase carefully planned and executed by people who would never live to see the final result. Parents had trained children who grew up to train their own children in skills that seemed useless until this exact moment. Ordinary humans had spent their entire lives preparing for a war that most of them hoped would never come. Human technical specialists had volunteered for assignments throughout Vorthak space, working in conditions that were often dangerous and always monitored. They repaired military equipment, maintained communication networks, and provided software updates with professional competence while secretly modifying everything they touched. The modifications were so subtle that even detailed inspections had failed to detect them. A navigation computer might work perfectly for years before a hidden subroutine activated to send ships in wrong directions. A weapons targeting system could pass every diagnostic test while containing code that would eventually cause it to track imaginary targets. Every human colony, trading post, and diplomatic mission had been part of the network. Civilians who seemed to be pursuing normal careers in engineering and computer science were actually agents in the longest and most patient intelligence operation in galactic history. They had embedded themselves so deeply in alien technology that removing them would require rebuilding civilization from scratch. The scope of the operation became clear as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The Zephyrian Republic discovered that their defense networks contained human modifications that had been there for 50 years. The Nexari Union found that their crystal matrix computers had been subtly altered during routine maintenance visits by human technician species that had relied on Vorthak technology. Suddenly found themselves cut off from their own systems. Worlds that had been conquered decades ago watched as their Vorthak occupiers became helpless prisoners of equipment that no longer obeyed commands. The empire that had seemed invincible was reduced to using tools and methods that predated spaceflight. On the moon base of Titan 7 Vorthak garrison, Commander Zorak tried to understand how his entire facility had become inoperable overnight. Life support systems worked perfectly but refused to respond to manual controls. Communication arrays pointed at empty space instead of the planets they were supposed to contact. Weapon systems had locked themselves into maintenance mode. His engineering staff could find nothing physically wrong with the equipment. Every component tested as functional and every connection showed proper electrical flow, but the software that controlled everything had somehow become unresponsive to Vorthak commands. The computers seemed to be waiting for instructions in a language that no Vorthak knew. The same pattern repeated across thousands of installations as the Empire military might crumbled from within. Fleets that had never known defeat found themselves unable to coordinate attacks, while ground forces discovered that their vehicles would not start. The warrior culture that had conquered through superior technology was learning what happened when that technology turned against them. In the deepest levels of the Pentagon on Earth, Admiral Chen Wu watched satellite feeds showing Vorthic forces stranded throughout their territory. Some garrisons had been reduced to using animal-drawn carts while others attempted to rebuild basic communication using primitive radio equipment. The mighty empire was being forced to rediscover technologies they had abandoned centuries ago. The operation had succeeded beyond even the most optimistic projections. Every system failure had cascaded into additional failures as Vorthic engineers attempted repairs with tools that also contained hidden modifications. Their efforts to fix problems only created new problems. In an endless cycle that was slowly destroying their technological civilization, species throughout the galaxy watched in amazement as their Vorthic oppressors became increasingly helpless. Former slaves found themselves guarding their former masters, while conquered worlds declared independence, knowing that no Vorthic fleet could reach them through the chaos of failed navigation systems. The humans had not destroyed Vorthic technology, but had instead made it impossible to use. The distinction was important because it meant that once human control was established, the systems could be made to work properly again under new management. The species that had seemed too naive to understand galactic politics had just executed the most sophisticated conquest in recorded history. Wu allowed himself a small smile as he watched the final status reports come in from across the galaxy. The network that had been built in secret over 3 generations was performing exactly as designed. The quiet engineers and patient planners had succeeded where conventional military force would have failed. The species that other aliens had dismissed as harmless traitors had just demonstrated that the most effective weapons were often the ones that looked like helpful gifts. The Vorthic Empire was learning too late that some forms of conquest were so subtle that the victims thanked their conquerors for the privilege. In 72 hours, humanity would begin the next phase of their plan, but the hard work was already finished. The galaxy would wake up to a very different balance of power, one where the quiet diplomats and patient engineers had proven more dangerous than all the warrior fleets in known space. The Galactic Council chambers had never seen chaos like this in its 300-year history. Representatives from 200 species filled the Great Dome with shouting arguments and desperate pleas, while Ambassador Hyjin walked calmly to her seat carrying the same leather notebook she had brought to every session. 3 days had passed since the Vorthic technology failures began, and the empire that had dominated half the galaxy was now completely helpless. Their fleets drifted in space, unable to navigate between stars, while their ground forces were reduced to using hand tools and walking everywhere. The mighty warriors who had conquered worlds were now prisoners of their own equipment. Species that had abandoned humanity during the crisis now sent desperate messages begging for Earth friendship. The Arachnid Republic offered exclusive trading rights, while the Nexari Union promised to share their most advanced crystal technologies. Even the proud Centaurians, who had closed their borders to human ships, now offered full military alliance. The chamber fell silent as Hyjin took her place at the human delegation table. She looked exactly the same as she had a week ago, wearing a simple black business suit with her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her calm expression had not changed, even though the balance of galactic power had shifted completely in humanity. Favor Ambassador Gorvek of the Vorthic Empire sat hunched in his chair, looking like a broken giant. His scarred face showed exhaustion and defeat, while his massive frame seemed to have shrunk under the weight of his empire collapse. He had not slept in 3 days as reports of failures flooded in from every corner of Vorthic space. The Nexari representative spoke first, her crystalline voice chiming with desperate urgency. Ambassador Hyjin, surely Earth can call off this systematic destruction of Vorthic civilization. The Empire has learned their lesson about threatening human lives. Surely your people believe in mercy and forgiveness. Hyjin opened her notebook and consulted her handwritten notes before responding in the same polite tone she had always used. Thank you for your concern about galactic stability. However, I must correct a misunderstanding. Earth is not attacking or destroying anything. We are simply no longer providing technical support for systems that require human expertise to function properly. The gentle ones. Ambassador stepped forward with his large eyes filled with confusion. But surely you can restore the Vorthic systems to working order. Billions of beings throughout their territory are suffering without proper transportation, communication, and medical equipment. Your people have always been compassionate. Again, Hygiene consulted her notebook before answering. Earth has always been willing to provide technical assistance to species that treat human personnel with dignity and respect. Unfortunately, recent events have demonstrated that such cooperation with the Vorthic Empire would place human lives at unacceptable risk. The Aquarian delegate made bubbling sounds that translated as urgent questions. What are Earth terms for ending this situation? What does humanity want in exchange? For restoring normal galactic operations, surely there must be some form of negotiation possible. Hygiene turned to a specific page in her notebook and read from her handwritten notes. Earth has one simple requirement: the immediate and unconditional release of all human prisoners currently held by Vorthic forces, followed by formal apologies for violations of galactic law regarding the treatment of civilians and diplomatic symbols. Gorvak struggled to his feet, using the table for support. His empire was collapsing around him while his people faced technological chaos that could last for generations. He had no choice but to accept any terms that might restore some semblance of normal operations to Vorthak space. The prisoners will be released immediately, and all requested apologies will be broadcast throughout the galaxy. Your people can have anything they want, just please restore our systems to working order. My empire is dying without the technology your people modified. Ijin closed her notebook and looked directly at him for the first time since entering the chamber. Her expression remained politely neutral, but something in her eyes made even the massive Vorthic warrior take a step backward. She spoke in the same calm tone, but her words carried weight that filled the entire chamber. Ambassador Gorvak, I appreciate your willingness to negotiate. However, you seem to misunderstand the situation. This is not a war or an attack. This is simply the natural consequence of burning Earth flags and threatening human civilians. She stood up and smoothed her simple jacket, while every being in the chamber waited for her next words. The species that had seemed so weak and defenseless had just demonstrated power that no military force could match. They had conquered an empire without firing a single shot. Earth has very clear rules about warfare, she continued. We believe in honorable combat, treating prisoners with dignity, and protecting civilian populations. We have followed these rules throughout our galactic expansion and expected other species to show similar restraint. The chamber remained completely silent as she continued. When conflicts arise between military forces, Earth is prepared to negotiate settlements that respect the rights and dignity of all involved species. We understand that warrior cultures have different traditions, but we can usually find common ground for peaceful coexistence. Agak nodded, desperately hoping that humanity was finally offering terms that could end the technological nightmare consuming his empire. He had been prepared to accept almost any conditions in exchange for getting his civilization back to working order. But what happened to humans on station? Gamma 7 was not warfare, Hygiene said, and her voice carried a finality that made several delegates step backward. It was terrorism. The deliberate targeting of civilians, including children, for the purpose of causing fear and demonstrating power. She walked toward the chamber exit while her words echoed in the dome-shaped room. Earth has different rules for terrorism. Ambassador Gorvak, our rule is very simple: no survivors. The implications of her statement spread through the chamber like ripples in a pond. The Vorthak Empire would not be destroyed quickly through military conquest. Instead, it would slowly collapse as their technological civilization became permanently inoperable. Their warriors would survive, but their empire would die by inches. Species throughout the galaxy realized that the quiet humans they had dismissed as naive merchants had just demonstrated the most sophisticated form of conquest ever attempted. The Vorthak would remain alive to serve as an example of what happened to species that burned Earth flags and threatened human children. As Hygiene reached the chamber entrance, she paused and turned back to address the assembled representatives. The human colonies and trading posts that had been integrated into the